Hi folks, welcome back to my little hobby channel where I talk about stuff that interests me and might interest you. On this occasion, I'm talking about my own personal favourites when it comes to westerns, my top 10 list. Might be different to yours, probably will be. I know I'm going to commit sacrilege later on. Anyway, let's get into it. Cowboy movies is a term that they would have been called, I suppose, by previous generations. Cowboys and Indians even. Cowboy pictures. It's funny, only in America have lowly paid agricultural workers achieved this mythic status. And that's a whole complicated story in itself. But the rest of the world loves it. So we're going to get into it with number 10. Dances with Wolves. Dances with Wolves is a big sprawling epic directed by Kevin Costner, starring Kevin Costner. This would have been when Kevin Costner was really at the top of his game. His career was just going from strength to strength, and then not too long afterwards it kind of faltered and took a left turn somewhere around the time of The Postman, I think. But he could do no wrong at this stage. 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Fantastic score by John Barry. Tells the story of a cavalry officer who gets basically posted out to some outpost in the middle of nowhere and encounters Indians, and eventually, I'm going to call them American Indians, Native Americans is the politically correct term, but I have heard that older members of that community prefer the term American Indians and feel that Native Americans is a bit too trendy and foisted upon them. I don't know. I'm going to call them American Indians because I think that's the way they're referred to in most of these movies, and I certainly don't mean any insult to anybody by that, so I think I'm okay there, am I? I don't know. This movie really does give the Indian point of view. There was a movie previously, I remember this, had a very striking poster when I was a kid, seeing it on the side of buses and things. I've been taking it back, called Soldier Blue. And I think I have seen that since, and I think it follows that kind of a similar storyline. You could almost say Avatar is like a copy of this as well, to be honest. He's taken prisoner by the Indians. He encounters a people that he didn't really know, and he comes to identify with them as he learns more about them. Dances with Wolves. That's a movie you should know if you haven't seen it. Number 9 is The Magnificent Seven. Now, The Magnificent Seven is basically what would you call it? There's a company of actors. It's really very much team storyline, basically, right, is there's a small Mexican village being hassled on a regular basis by a Mexican bandit and his cutthroats, and they struggle to survive because every time they take in a harvest, every time they accumulate anything, they're robbed blind. So they put together what little money they have, and they send a little delegation north to try and find some men, some gunmen, who can help them stand up to these bandits. They encounter Yul Brynner and Steve McQueen. They see them involved in an incident in a small town. It's probably, is it Tombstone or somewhere? And they ask them to raise some men to come and help them. So they accumulate a collection of drifters, down on their luck, bounty hunters, gunfighters, a motley collection of characters, all good characters, good actors, and the 7 of them then head down to Mexico, to this village, to help this village stand up against the bandit and his men. The music is so well known, you know it. If you haven't seen this, if you think, oh yeah, that's just some old movie that was on in the afternoons when I was a kid, if you haven't seen the movie, it's far better than the remake. The remake is very well done and everything, but it's kind of forgettable. This is the epic story that they missed the epicness in the remake. It contains one of my favourite lines from a movie, actually.
Do you want to go? Well, there comes a time to turn Mother's picture to the wall and get out. The village will be no worse off than it was before we came.
You forget one thing. We took a contract.
It's not the kind any court would enforce.
That's just the kind you've got to keep.
That's just the kind you got to keep. Magnificent Seven. Required viewing if you haven't seen it. Great music by Elmer Bernstein and directed by John Sturges. Required viewing if you haven't seen it. That was number 9. Number 8, Shane, directed by George Stevens. If you like music, and you like the music you hear today, you don't know music unless you've listened to early Beatles and early Stones, and even followed that further back to Sonny Boy Williamson and Muddy Waters, stuff like that. You need to know the early stuff. This is an epic story again. It's almost mythical. Powerful bad guy running this town, driving out the small homesteaders, affecting a whole community. They try to stand up to him, they can't. There's one particular family, a drifter comes through. The drifter stays with the family, helps out around the farm. He sees what's happening. The husband is a good man, tries to stand up to the bad guys, doesn't work. So the drifter, who has a past, decides to take a stand for this town. The bad guy has hired a gunslinger who's played by Jack Palance, who plays a real nasty piece of work.
Tell me they called you a stone wall.
Anything wrong with that?
That's just funny. Guess they named a lot of that southern trash after old stone wall.
Okay, Shane is on the list, but it was a tough choice between Shane and another movie as iconic, similar era. I wanted to put either one of these on, and the other movie that I neglected in favour of Shane. Maybe I shouldn't have. It's 1952's High Noon.
Do not forsake me, oh my darling, on this our wedding day. Do not forsake me, oh my darling, wait long. The noonday train will bring Frank Miller.
This is also a classic, an old iconic movie. Black and white, 1952, Fred Zinnemann directed, starring Gary Cooper, Grace Kelly and Katie Jurado. And it tells the story of a marshal who's just got married, about to leave town with his new bride, when word comes that the gang, Frank Miller and his boys, the gang that he had put in prison, is coming back on the noon train, seeking revenge. So
Will, I'm begging you, please let's go.
I can't.
Don't try to be a hero. You don't have to be a hero, not for me.
I'm not trying to be a hero. If you think I like this, you're crazy. Look, Amy, this is my town. I've got friends here. I'll swear in a bunch of special deputies, and with a posse behind me, maybe there won't even be any trouble.
You know there'll be trouble.
Then it's better to have it here.
it's another movie like Shane. A man's got to do what a man's got to do. He's got to stand tall on his own. It's an iconic movie. It was one of the top 25 movies that the National Archives in America, Library of Congress Archives, decided was one of the iconic films that needed to be preserved. Tony Soprano refers to this film a lot, talks about the Gary Cooper character as being the typical male hero, American hero. Whatever happened to Gary Cooper, you know, he says a few times in that series. And there are political overtones, kind of, people say it relates to the McCarthy era and all that, that cancel culture they had going on back then. And it's basically a story, it's an anti-heroes, kind of anti-Western, what would you call it, revisionist Western, whereby everybody isn't a perfect gentleman. Lots of the town folk find reasons not to help this time, and he finds himself on his own.
It's true I haven't been a church-going man, and maybe that's a bad thing. And I didn't get married here today because my wife's a Quaker. But I came here for help because there are people here.
John Wayne regarded it as the most un-American thing he'd ever seen, but it's still revered as an iconic movie. The overtones with the women is very interesting too. Katie Jurado plays his old flame, Mexican woman, brilliantly actually. She's a fantastic character, fantastic presence. And Grace Kelly is the naive Eastern blonde, virginal wife that he's just married, who is a bit taken aback by all this going on.
Kane, if you're smart, you will get out too.
I can't.
I know.
But no, it's good. Maybe it should be on the list. But I had to pick between the two of them, right? And I went for Shane. These are two films of my father's generation, shall we say, that, you know, people would have loved back then as being standing tall, about men standing tall, and Yeah, so I picked Shane, and one of the reasons I did that is because I wanted to show you the scene that people think originated in Taxi Driver, but Taxi Driver that scene was simply paying homage to this scene in Shane.
Well, what'll it be? Lemon, strawberry, or lilac, sodbuster?
You speaking to me?
I don't see nobody else standing there.
It's a great film, and again, it is required viewing. Alan Ladd plays the drifter, who is one of these characters at the end when he's riding off. He's wounded, and it's one of these, been copied so many times since, including in a later movie in this list. He's riding off wounded, so is he going to live or die? You know, but he's done his bit. He's been the honourable knight who stood up to the dragon and now gone off to riding off into the sunset. Mixing the metaphors here. Number 7 is Hostiles. This movie was on Netflix there for ages and I never looked at it. Watched it, thought, Christ, that's really good. Christian Bale, Rosamund Pike, and Wes Studi. And it revolves around a retiring cavalry officer who's given up the fight and is retiring back east. He has to travel back. His last duty is to bring back east one of the Indians who he was fighting against and his family.
Anyone gives you any trouble, just show them these. Guarantee you safe passage.
So long, Colonel.
Goodbye, Blocker. Joe. You were a good soldier.
I still am.
Colonel.
Detail! Forward! March!
And he then gets stabbed with this survivor of an Indian attack, Rosamund Pike. So it's a bit of a road movie on horses, if you know what I mean. That's the thing about westerns, isn't it? Westerns that are cavalry versus Indians are basically war movies. The bank robbery movies, the Jesse James movies, are effectively cops and robbers. And the long treks, cattle drives are like road movies. But this is basically a road movie on horses. Good story. Ben Foster's in it too. Great ending too, actually. I love the ending. You like the ending. Hostiles. Music by Max Richter. Written and directed by Scott Cooper. Well worth a look, I tell you. If you haven't heard of it, it's on my list of top 10, so it has to be good, doesn't it? Check it out, Hostiles. Next one, number 6. The Assassination of Jesse James. The full title is The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. Brad Pitt. There's been a lot of movies made about Jesse James. This movie is just made with a certain sense of grandeur, and even the buildings are characters in this.
It was 40 miles to his sister's farm from Kansas City, and it was well into the afternoon by the time he arrived there. Mrs. Martha Bolton rented the Harbison farm in 1879, just after becoming a widow. And she made a good income by giving rooms and meals to her brothers Charlie, Wilbur, and Bob.
The authenticity of the whole thing shines through. Casey Affleck plays the bad guy, and Brad Pitt plays Jesse James. Jesse James is a bad guy, of course. He's a bandit, robber, you know. Doesn't earn his money honestly. So, but he's also kind of the hero in this. You know, that's the thing about these movies, isn't it? They do make us look up to bad guys as heroes sometimes. Anyway, it's a great film.
Jesse was sick, with rheums and aches and lung congestions. Insomnia stained his eye sockets like soot. He read auguries in the snarled intestines of chickens, or the blow of cat hair released to the wind. And the omens promised bad luck, which moted and dungeoned him.
The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. Visual feast. Sergio Leone made a couple of westerns. I've only put one of them. He made a few. He made 3 with Clint Eastwood that everybody knows about, right? And then he made Once Upon a Time in the West. I've only picked one of his movies, and it's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But you have to see Once Upon a Time in the West. The problem with Once Upon a Time in the West is there's long patches where it's kind of unimpressive, and the harmonica thing doesn't really work. It's supposed to be Charles Bronson playing the harmonica when it appears on the soundtrack, and it just doesn't work, and that lets it down. But yet, it's a flawed masterpiece, shall we say? There's that epic scene at the end, the music, the showdown, and the finale of that film, and some of the other shots as well. Some of the landscaping and everything, the trains. There's incredible scenes in it. You need to see it. It's not on the list because it's not perfect. It's not good enough. It's not something I'll go back to. But if I do go back to it, it'll be to search out particular scenes and marvel at the mastery of some of those scenes where images and music are put together so well. But the overall story is better in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And I like story. Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. 3 individuals who know a little bit about where a treasure is buried, and they're travelling to try and find it. Arch Denton, is that the grave? Somebody knows where the graveyard is, and somebody else knows the name on the grave. And so Lee Van Cleef, Eli Wallach, and Clint Eastwood, all 3 of them are on the trail of this treasure. and the story rambles around all over the place. All kinds of interesting set pieces. They get caught up in the American Civil War at one point, which is very interesting. There's some very poignant moments at times as well. There's a good moment around the battle for this bridge. There's a good moment when Clint Eastwood encounters a dying soldier. As always with Sergio Leone, the music by Ennio Morricone is like another character in the film. And it's unique the way he uses it in his movies, and it's brilliant. The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. That was number 5. Number 4, Open Range. Robert Duvall and Kevin Costner. Great story, some great dialogue, some macho stuff, 2 cowboys trying to put things to rights on a cattle drive.
Real nice, Charlie.
Robert Duvall and Kevin Costner, you know, two great Western stars.
Barkeep, 2 whiskeys.
You see that sign? Around these parts, free grazers is a first.
Now he asked you twice. Ain't gonna ask again.
If there was a space on this list for a miniseries, Lonesome Dove with Robert Duvall and Tommy Lee Jones would be there. As good as any movie on this list, that series. If you don't know about it, Lonesome Dove was a Pulitzer Prize winning novel by Larry McMurtry. And there was a prequel and also a follow-up novel written as well, a few novels written about it. So they started churning out TV series based on it as well. The original series, the original miniseries, won loads of awards.
Trouble, he's like me.
You mean lazy?
I mean mature. He don't get excited about little things like crossing the river no more than I do.
Well, you don't get excited about nothing except biscuits, maybe.
You bet.
And whores.
Mm-hmm.
Really good. It's a great series involving 3 or 4 different people whose stories all come together as the series goes on. And there's a cattle drive from Texas up to Montana, I think, is basically the spine of the story. It's fantastic. But this movie I was just talking about there, Open Range, was my number 4. Number 3 is a movie that I don't actually have a copy of that I can lay my hand on, and I'm bloody sure I had a copy. Where the hell could it be? Anyway, it's a movie that you won't see on many lists because people kind of forgot all about it. It stars Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando Western. What do you think it's going to be? It's The One-Eyed Jacks. Slightly unusual for a Western. It's set in a coastal Western town. It's a great story. Karl Malden, Marlon Brando. It's kind of a revenge thing. They're two buddies, two pals. But one lets down the other and the other comes looking for revenge.
We ain't gonna do no good from here.
I'll be stomping all over since inside an hour.
We better think of something funny. And quick.
It's unique for the setting. It's a good story. They're both very watchable. Karl Malden is great in this, as he is in lots of things.
I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget.
If you don't know what One-Eyed Jacks means, it's a term. It's to do with cards, playing cards. If you look at jacks, 2 of the jacks have one eye. And when people are playing poker, often you'll choose a wild card. You can say One-Eyed Jacks are wild, or sometimes when we were playing, it used to be the One-Eyed Jacks or the Suicide King were wild. The Suicide King is the king sticking the sword in the back of his head. And they you could use them as anything then if you drew them in poker. So it was a common enough thing. So One-Eyed Jacks is the name of the film.
You know me, Rio. If there was anything I could have done, I'd have been in there like a streak.
What's going to happen to who?
I said it's all right, dog.
Well, what's it gonna be now?
There's a small fishing village up the coast a couple of miles.
Would it be that you have your
Called Punta del Diablo.
him to die?
When we get there, what then?
We'll just
No reasons
wait.
at all. You just robbed the bank and killed a little girl, that's all. Why do you ask?
Oh, I heard you might have personal reasons.
Personal reasons? Like what?
It's the story about you run away from him in Mexico and leave him to die. Did you? It's true?
I've heard that story. Where did you hear it?
And number 2. John Ford is well known for some great westerns. The sacrilege comes in here where I don't have The Searchers on my list. Is that a coyote call or the howls of outrage I hear? Yeah, The Searchers is regarded as John Ford's masterpiece. I have a copy of it. Yes, I know it well. I didn't pick that. I picked Fort Apache. I'll tell you why in a sec. The Searchers is a big widescreen Technicolor, great looking film. It's got some iconic scenes. It's regarded as a masterpiece. It's a story of redemption. It's John Wayne is a character who can't get over, he can't accept his niece who's been captured by the Indians and recovered, and he just can't handle that. Takes him some time, but it's all about searching and tracking and following, trying to recover after this Indian raid. This girl has been captured. It's an epic tale. I can't get over the 2 young leads. I just can't get past them. I can't take them. I just can't buy their performances. To me, they're like two actors that wandered in from some 1950s teen beach surfing movie.
Debbie?
Und mehr.
Debbie? Debbie, don't you remember? I'm Martin, your brother. Remember? Debbie, remember back. Do you remember how I used to let you ride my horse? And tell you stories? Oh, don't you remember me, Debbie?
I remember. From always.
To me, if I watch that movie, I'm watching it as if I'm watching a lesson in movie making. I'm not in the story. So that's why I don't watch that often. John Ford's Cavalry trilogy, made in 48, 49 and 50, I think, yeah. And the first one is Fort Apache. The second one is She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. And the third one is Rio Grande. John Wayne is in all three of them, as is Victor McLagan. Victor McLagan plays an Irish sergeant. Now, John Ford loves his Irishness and always has a few Irish characters in his westerns, or tends to. And Victor McLagan plays this sergeant who is, in the second and third movies, he's called Quincannon. In the first movie, he plays the Irish sergeant, and there's another Irish sergeant called Quincannon, who they get out of jail to do some singing, get out of the guardhouse. So he's a different character. But John Wayne plays a character called Kirby York in the first movie and the third movie. But in the second movie, he plays a guy called Nathan Brittles. Now, the middle movie is in colour. All three are, at least in my copies anyway, are 4:3. They're not widescreen. The first and third are black and white. He plays a colonel about to retire from a cavalry post in the middle movie. John Wayne does. There's a guy called Tyree, one of the soldiers, a good horseman, played very entertainingly by Ben Johnson in the second movies, the second and third movies. But in the third movie made, he's a new recruit. When in the second movie, he's a sergeant. So, and in that second movie, John Wayne plays a guy who's retiring. So if I was you, I would watch them. I'd watch the first movie, then the third movie made, and then the second movie, and it would make more sense, I think. Because even the sergeant is retiring at the end of the second movie, even though he's in the third movie too. So those three movies are Fort Apache is the first one.
Have you seen them, Captain?
I don't have to, I know.
How?
Because if I were Cochise, that's where I'd take up position.
And that dust cloud beyond?
It's an Apache trick. Probably squaws and children dragging mesquite.
Very ingenious, Captain. You make me suspect your Cochise has studied under Alexander the Great, or Bonaparte at the least. Gentlemen, march your troops. We'll charge in a column of fours.
Mounted in fours? That's suicide, Colonel. I tell you they're down there.
The second one made was She Wore a Yellow Ribbon.
Mr. Coyle, you will be in command. You'll take 2 squads, cover our crossing. Deny the hostiles the use of this ford.
First squad! Second squad!
The second squad has too many old married men.
First squad! Fifth squad! Wheel out! Bomb on the right!
Can you swim, Dickie, me boy?
No.
Well, I'm the best swimmer in the world. Once I swam the English Channel.
That's the colour one. And then Rio Grande.
I make it out to be a Mexican officer approaching to meet you, sir.
Cool off and water your horses. Bugler? Honors, please. 3 flourishes.
And having watched these three, I think they're fantastic. But Fort Apache to me stands out. What's great about these, they were churning out Western movies when they made these. And if, like me, you grew up in the 60s and 70s, you'd been seeing Western movies on all the time and the weekends. Loads of films where cavalry are fighting Indians and there's wagons in a ring and there's lots of shooting and they save the day at the last minute and all that. These movies aren't like that. There's a lot more to them. I like it. Like movies now the scripts are so finely honed and they have teams of writers in that just chop away everything that's unnecessary and everything, nothing is mentioned unless it pops up later on. There's nothing in there for whimsy. Occasionally you come across a movie with things that are in there just for no reason other than a sense of whimsy, and they're great when they happen. These movies have lots of stuff like that, actually, especially revolving around the soldiers, the sergeants, the Irish sergeants, and drinking and fighting. It's a bit of an Irish-American cliche that we Irish have to put up with, but it's kind of amusing. Victor McLagan, in the movie I'm going to pick here, now, Fort Apache, there's a number of Irish sergeants. Victor McLagan is the key man there. He's in a lot of John Ford movies. He won an Oscar himself playing an Irishman as in The Informer, based on Liam O'Flaherty's short story. So he's often played Irishman, but he is a Londoner. Grew up, ran away, joined the army at 14, joined the British Army, got kicked out when they realised his age at 16. Went back in, became a heavyweight champion for the British Army. Went off to Canada, was a prize fighter, ended up with a travelling circus where you would win $25 if you stayed in the ring for 3 rounds with him, I think. Ended up in Hollywood. Made loads of movies. If you look at his IMDb entry or his Wikipedia entry, you'll see the amount of movies that man made. But he got on well with John Ford. As did another actor who's in Fort Apache. Ward Bond made a few movies. They were both in The Quiet Man, playing Irishman. Ward Bond is an American actor. He played the Catholic priest in The Quiet Man. He plays an Irish Sergeant Major in Fort Apache.
Boy, so I can see you. Oh, you're just exactly the same. Well, now come over here and sit down and tell me everything.
Gee, Ma, you haven't changed a bit. Nothing has.
Well, why would it? 4 years is not so long. Or did you think to find me grown gray completely?
Woman, I leave you alone with your son, Lieutenant Michael O'Rourke, sir. Have I the lieutenant's permission to leave, sir?
Sergeant Major O'Rourke has permission.
Thank you, sir.
He had played football with John Wayne and was a buddy of his from the early days, and they both befriended John Ford when he made some movie about football players, and they were friends and colleagues from then on. So the story in Fort Apache, all these films have layers. They're not just a straightforward story about an incident or an attack or an adventure or a recovery or an escape. In Fort Apache, Henry Fonda turns up at this fort, cavalry fort. He's got his daughter with him, played by a grown-up Shirley Temple, who's actually quite cute in this. She falls for a young lieutenant who's also arriving at the fort at the same time. Second lieutenant, just qualified from West Point. But he is the son of the Irish Sergeant Major, played by Ward Bond. Henry Fonda doesn't like his daughter taking a shine to him. Big trouble there to do with class. And it's actually mentioned by name, class, in the army. Henry Fonda admonishes the Sergeant Major for not taking it seriously, the fact that there's these two different classes. Henry Fonda is very much of the upper class and is very concerned about what's going on in the eastern newspapers and stuff, and he feels a bit slighted being posted to this cavalry outpost. So he's not happy being there.
Understand me, gentlemen, I'm not a martinet. But I do want to take pride in my command. We here have little chance for glory or advancement, while some of our brother officers are leading their well-publicized campaigns against the great Indian nations, the Sioux and the Cheyenne. We are asked to ward off the gnat stings and flea bites of a few cowardly Digger Indians.
Your pardon, Colonel. You'd hardly call Apaches Digger Indians, sir.
You'd scarcely compare them with the Sioux, Captain.
No, I don't. The Sioux once raided into Apache territory. Old-timers told me you could follow their line of retreat by the bones of their dead.
I suggest the Apache has deteriorated since then, judging by a few of the specimens I've seen on my way out here.
Well, if you saw them, sir, they weren't Apaches.
We'll discuss the Apache at some other time, Captain. The immediate point, gentlemen, is that I hope to know you all better. If we don't understand each other now, we soon will. Questions? Good morning, gentlemen. You may return to your breakfasts or your other duties.
He's not happy when he has to go to the NCO's ball and has to dance with the Sergeant Major's wife as the first dance. There's a lot of that tension there. There's also things like when he turns up, there's a party going on in the fort, a dinner dance kind of thing. And so he demands to know why there's a party. And someone says it's a birthday party. And he says, well, whose party? Whose birthday is it? And John Wayne says, who's only captain, John Wayne says, well, it's the General George Washington's birthday, which kind of puts him back in his box. So there's lots of these little subtleties going on all the time. And there's light-hearted stuff with Victor McLagan, the Irish sergeants, singing and dancing and fighting, or singing and drinking and fighting. There's no dancing, is there? There is, a little bit.
Bible, sir.
Sergeant, pour me some scripture. What's in this? Brimstone and sulfur?
You know what it is, and I'm entitled to keep it.
Your license may permit you to keep a medicinal store of whiskey, but this is no whiskey.
Perhaps you're not used to frontier whiskey.
I don't know. I've tasted most everything. Sergeant, you a judge of whiskey?
Well, some people say I am, and some say I'm not, sir.
Tell me what you make of this.
Well, it's better than no whiskey at all, sir.
The story, the conventional wisdom is that John Ford didn't do well by Indians in his movies. And so when he made the movie Cheyenne Autumn, he was basically trying to atone for that, for the rest of his movies. And in Cheyenne Autumn, he's very sympathetic to the Indians and their case. He has Richard Widmark playing an officer who is very sympathetic to them, and it shows the Trail of Tears and all that. And that is that's very well done and all that. I think that might be a little unfair on him, because certainly in Fort Apache, the Indians are shown as being given a raw deal. Cochise is on the warpath, or he's taken his people off the reservation, and that's the big concern in the film. And it's explained in the film that they had done a deal, they had gone to the reservation, they discovered they were based, I think even the phrase "a living death" is used, that so they left. And the John Wayne character is quite sympathetic to their position and the way they've been treated and abused by the Indian agent or the sutler that is referred to, who's selling them drink and selling them weapons, it turns out too, but also selling them crap food and you know, shitty products, blankets and so on, very poor quality stuff. So they're being shafted. They say enough's enough, they go on the run, and the cavalry are after them.
Well?
Cochise has crossed the river, sir. He's coming in with all his people. Wants to talk peace.
He's returned to American soil?
Yes, sir. Now, with the Colonel's permission, I'd like to shake some of this Mexican Dobie dust and get back to the dance.
There'll be no time for that, Captain. The regiment moves out at dawn.
The regiment? Coachy says he'll meet with you and me and Meacham. We'll take a small detail and go unarmed. I've arranged a rendezvous this side of the Dragoons.
Sergeant made you to stop the dance. That's the word of the first sergeant. Prepare their troops to march at dawn. Troop commanders will oblige me by meeting at headquarters at once.
Colonel, if you send out the regiment, Cochise will think I've tricked him.
Exactly. We have tricked him into returning to American soil, and I intend to see that he stays
There's
here.
lots of subtleties to what's going on there. There's also, in all three movies, there's subtle references to the fact that people are comrades in the cavalry who were on opposite sides in the Civil War. And that's a big deal, actually, in the film Rio Grande, where Maureen O'Hara arrives. John Wayne is playing the same character he plays in Fort Apache, but older. Maureen O'Hara arrives, his estranged wife he hasn't seen in years.
I'll take you home again, Kathleen, across the ocean wild and wide, to where your heart has ever been, since first you were my blushing bride. The roses all have left your cheek. I've watched them fade away, and
This music is not of my choosing.
your voice.
I'm sorry, Kirby. I wish it had been.
Whene'er you
Her and Wayne, that goes back to the Civil War. So there's all these subtleties in the story. And look, I'm going to say this to you. If you're young and you're used to big flashy films and you're thinking, I'm not going to watch a 4:3 dimension black and white film with all these old actors like John Wayne and stuff, the stories are really, really good. And stories are what make a film. Stories are what it's all about. If somebody's telling you a story, it doesn't matter how well dressed they are, how well spoken they are, how impressive they're looking they are. If the story is boring, it's a boring story. If somebody's telling you a good story, it doesn't matter if they're a tramp. It doesn't matter if they're in bits and you're standing in the street and it starts to rain. If they're telling you a good story, you'll stand there in the rain to hear that story. If you think old black and white movies aren't your thing, give it a go and pay attention to the script. There's lots in this. It's very good. Very good. Now, maybe I've overdone that, have I? Anyway, that was Fort Apache, right? That was number 2. The Outlaw Josey Wales. I just like this movie. I like it for lots of reasons. I like it for the cast. I like it for Clint being who he is. One of the people in it is Chief Dan George. He's an actor, an Indian, American Indian.
You know, we got to see the Secretary of the Interior, and he said, "Boy, you boys sure look civilized." He congratulated us, and he gave us medals for looking so civilized.
There's confrontations, there's rescues, there's shootouts, there's a sort of a community that they form at the end, and they have to stand up for and defend them.
You'll be 10 Bears?
I am 10 Bears.
I'm Josey Wales.
I have heard.
So there you have it. That's my list. Top 10 westerns. As with all these things, it could change if I did it again next week. Hope you got something from that. Maybe you've seen something there that you're going to chase up and hopefully you'll enjoy. Thanks for sticking with this to the end if you did. I'll see you again no doubt soon. Bye now. Mind yourselves.